Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Matthew Dix, who's here to share with us his new book, Someday is Today. 22 Simple, Actionable Ways to Propel Your Creative Life. So Matthew is a best-selling author, nationally recognized storyteller, and award-winning elementary school teacher. He teaches storytelling and communications at universities, workplaces, and community organizations. He has won multiple Moth Grand Slam story competitions and together with his wife created the organization Speak Up to help other people share their stories. So welcome to the show, Matthew Dix.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What inspired you to write this?
Well, I tend to wear a lot of hats. I'm an elementary school teacher and I publish novels and books of nonfiction. I own a couple businesses. I stay busy doing a lot of different things. And so whenever I'm standing in front of people, which I do a lot, the question I get asked the most is, how do you manage to do all the things that you do? And I've never felt like I answered that question very well. I'd offer a few strategies or some tips, but I always felt like I'm really giving you nothing. That if you really want to get more done, there really is a great way about doing it, but it would take me, 13 hours to tell you that. And nobody wants to hear 13 hours from me ever, even my wife. And so the book is sort of the attempt to answer that question for folks. How do you get your dreams to come true despite the fact that our world today is so demanding?
Well, and so ever changing, it seems like too, because I know right now a lot of people are looking at how do I reinvent myself or maybe chase a new dream.
Yeah, I love that. Truly, I always think that the most interesting things we do in life are those moments when someone asks us to do something or we see an opportunity and it doesn't really look like something we might want to do or something we've ever expected to do, but we decide to sort of step one foot in the door and see what it's like. For me and for the people I work with, that's often been the most productive and interesting parts of our lives.
Where do you think people get hung up the most in, setting up a new dream and creating it?
I think honestly, it's just the sort of getting off the ground moment. I think that so many people begin with the thought of perfection. And I always think perfection sort of dooms anything, any project, because nothing is ever going to be perfect. I like to say that we make terrible things all the time, and that has to be our expectation. And I've heard the phrase quite often that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I sort of hate that expression too, because the implication there is we're going to make something good. And oftentimes the first thing we make or our first attempt isn't even good. It's pretty awful. So I always like to say, don't let perfect be the enemy of progress. We have to take that first step forward. And I think what happens for most people is they're so afraid to take the first step and sort of blunder that they never take any step at all.
I think that's probably true with life in general. People are just like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And so staying where maybe it's comfortable, but not really fulfilling seems to be where people end up getting stuck, I think.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things I'm sort of obsessed with is the idea that we have to rid our lives of as much regret or potential regret so that when we look back, when we're 100 years old and we look back on our lives, we're happy with the decisions that we made and we can feel good about the life that we've lived. And I know from speaking to hospice workers and researchers that so often that is not the case for people in their final days, that they spend so much time at the end of their life wishing they had done things differently. And I just think this is the time that we have to make sure that we're doing the hard and crazy and frightening things, because that is what that 100-year-old version of us wants to do. That person wants us to take risks now because eventually we're going to run out of time to take those risks.
Isn't that the truth? I understand that someday isn't even your favorite word. Why is that?
I, it's true. I hate the word someday. I think the problem with someday is it's a trick. It's this awful it's this awful fool's gold. It convinces people that they don't have to do it today because someday they will accomplish the thing that they've always dreamed of. And then what happens is we simply run out of some days. Either we become too old to seek out those things that we once thought were possible, or frankly, we just run out of days and suddenly we're staring death in the face and realizing that all of those some days that we were waiting for have already passed us. So every time I hear someone say, well, I'm going to get to that someday, what I hear is you're never going to get to it because you actually think there will be a someday. And I understand the shortness and fragility of life. So I can't stand the word. I think it traps people into inaction.
Well, the way you put it, I would have to agree with you. But I like how you're kind of using that as more of a motivator and saying that someday is today, the title of your book.
Yeah, it's that idea that today is the day to begin the thing. Today is the day to start that dream or take that first step, that we cannot wait for tomorrow because tomorrow is not a guarantee. We are not promised anything other than the moment we're currently living in.
Well, you touched on something a little earlier. You talked about the 100-year-old plan. So, what is that? And is it something that we should be looking at right now?
Yeah, I think we should. So, when I was younger, when I was about 21, I was robbed at gunpoint. And it was one of those really horrific moments in my life. And I was absolutely certain I was about to die. There were guns to my head and threats that the triggers were going to be pulled. And, in that last, what I thought was going to be the moment of my life, I was sort of astounded by the fact that I didn't feel fear or anger or even sadness over what was about to happen to me. The only feeling that I was consumed with was regret. The idea that I was 21 and I was lying on the floor of a restaurant about to die and having not accomplished anything like what I had wanted to do for so many years. And so from that moment, I've sort of become obsessed with the idea that I cannot allow myself to experience that ever again. And I really don't want anyone to have that feeling that I felt. And so what I did is I decided that rather than relying on the person I am today to make decisions about how I'll spend this day, instead I look ahead. I ask the 100-year-old version of myself, the one sort of at the end of his life, looking back, what would he want me to do today? How would he want me to spend this day? And when I ask him what I should do, it's very rarely things like binge a television show or eat 19 cheeseburgers or take a break and do nothing. And I believe in all those things. I believe in binging television shows every now and again. And I believe in cheeseburgers. And I even believe in sitting on a couch and just thinking about yourself or staring at your cat. I think all those things are great. But I think that people do them to an excess that sort of hinders their ability to be happy. And so the 100-year-old version of myself says, listen, stop staring at your phone. Go play with your kid. Or listen, it would be nice to sort of watch 9 hours of Netflix today, but don't you think instead you should go for a bike ride or play golf with your friends or work on building that business or finish that novel? So it's the idea that we have wisdom at the end of our lives. And if we can try to lean into that wisdom today, our decisions today will be better because of it.
Yeah, I know you have so many great points in your book, and one just kind of had me kind of giggling a little bit. You talked about the stupidity of bragging rights. So, what is that all about?
I don't remember what example I use in the book, but I'm always fascinated by the idea, or really horrified by the idea, that people will sometimes wait extraordinary amounts of time in order to be the first to do something or the only one to do something. A good example in my town was a Krispy Kreme opened up about 15 years ago. And I remember it because it was the talk of the town. And there were lines that stretched for an hour or more to get a donut. And it backed up traffic. It created all these problems. And then I just waited 2 weeks until all of that was over, until everyone who had like walked around saying, I was the first one to get a Krispy Kreme donut, or I got it on the first day it was here in our town. Those are those bragging rights. I walked in 2 weeks later, I got my donut, and I said, oh, it's all right. And I didn't wait a minute. But so often people feel like there's worth in saying that you were the first one to do it, even though it might have cost you 4 or 10 or 20 hours to do so. And ultimately that those bragging rights become meaningless. The only person they're important to is you, and eventually they're not that important to you either. So I believe in real honest to goodness experiences, and not sort of the opportunity to be the first or the last or the best at doing something. Just do it in a way that is most productive and most enjoyable and makes the best use of your time.
So when we bump into people who are just grumpy and crabby and not really pulling their best energy out today, they woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I mean, how much effort and attention do we need to put into that experience with them?
Not much. I like to think people don't wake up on the wrong side of the bed. They sort of live on the wrong side of the bed. I think we're allowed to have bad days, but I think we all know those people who just seemingly always wake up on the wrong side of the bed. But they're not helpful to us. The world is filled with so much negativity. There's so many people who just assume the worst, or if you manage to achieve something, they just hate you for it and create enormous problems for you. And so I'm a big believer in limiting the amount of negative energy coming our way while simultaneously increasing as much positivity in our lives. I get very obsessed with things like how we spend our time and how to be efficient and how to make sure we're maximizing each and every day. But I'm equally obsessed with the idea that our spirit needs to be nourished in many ways as we can possibly find. And one of them is to get rid of those people who will bring us down or create just negative thoughts or negative energy around us. We don't need them unless I'm an elementary school teacher. So I am obligated to deal with them when they're 10 years old and they're in my class. And I try to improve them in every way that I can. But otherwise, I just believe in making sure they don't impact us as often as possible.
I have to say, you have a chapter that's 5.5, and I felt like I was on the Harry Potter platform catching the train on that. But, you talk about the gift of yes in your book. And what is that? And why is yes a gift?
Well, there's a lot of talk nowadays. It's sort of like it's a hot button item for people to say that we need to say no more often in our lives. There's a lot of people advising all of us to sort of like limit the number of things we have going on in our lives and be willing to say no so that we can protect our time. And I think it's a very foolish bit of advice. I believe in yes because I believe that in life we're given opportunities. I always think of them as doors, and we're afforded a door. Would you like to do this? And regardless of what it is, no matter how much I don't actually want to do it, and regardless of how much I think it's not going to really be enjoyable for me, my belief has always been to say yes, because a yes can eventually become a no. I can step through the door. I can take a look around at this new opportunity I've been given. I can give it a chance. And then after I've sort of evaluated it, I can say, you know what, this is not for me. And I can come back through the door, close it, and turn that yes into a no. But if we say no right off the bat, what we've essentially done is just closed off an opportunity without ever really exploring it. And as I track through my life, what I've discovered is that all of the yeses of my life that seemed the most ridiculous have been the most rewarding, both personally and, spiritually and financially. Every single time someone has said, would you like to do this thing? The inside of me says, no, I've never wanted to do it. And I still don't want to do it, but I say yes and I give it a chance. So saying yes just acknowledges that yeses can become nos, but we need to look at every opportunity we're given as an opportunity to do something new and possibly great.
So when you say yes to, let's say, an outing, I think maybe some people may show up and be like, "Oh, I'm here." Are we supposed to bring our best attitude?
Yeah, ideally, I think that would be wonderful. I mean, it's not always positive, but, you know, 2 weeks ago, the Boy Scouts, my son is a Cub Scout, they said, let's go to this baseball game, which was sort of like an hour away. And it was not even a minor league team. It was sort of like a college summer team. And we live right next to a beautiful minor league stadium, brand new, with a wonderful team that we love to go. And my son said, well, let's go. You never know what's going to happen. So we drove an hour south and we went to this game. It was a 6,000 seat stadium. And honestly, there might have been 200 people there. There was absolutely no one at the game. And I thought, what are we doing here? Why did we drive all this way to sit with 200 people on a cloudy night to watch bad baseball? But what happened was, because there was only 200 people in the stadium, my son managed to snag 2 foul balls because there was no one else to snag them. And for me, they were just meaningless foul balls hit by college batters. But to my son, my 9-year-old son, he had caught a fly ball by a professional baseball player. He was so happy. And as the night went on, truly, my son was the one who kept telling me, this is great, Dad. I can yell to the third baseman and he can hear me. The whole stadium can hear me yelling to the third baseman. And so what I initially saw as sort of a wasted evening suddenly became a magical evening. Credit my son for all of that. But I would have said no had Charlie not said, please, let's go to that game. And so it's just another reminder to me that you just never know what's going to happen with a yes. But it's probably going to be one of the most memorable baseball games we ever go to in our lives, even though it was terrible in so many ways. So just say yes, bring your best self. And if you need Charlie or someone like Charlie to sort of pick you up, that's always a good strategy too.
I'm sure people are looking for their own Charlie in their group, right?
Well, I do believe in gathering a tribe of positive supporters around you so that you can have that, you can have that inspiration too. There's a whole chapter in my book about the importance of gathering those people so that they can help you on your path.
So, yeah, let's talk about something I think is probably like on everyone's mind. When we talk about social media, how does that impact? And what are your thoughts about its impact on productivity?
Well, I'm not opposed to social media. I've certainly gained a lot of friends and business contacts, and real meaningful things have come through social media. Facebook alone, for all of its awfulness, has allowed me to stay in touch with people that I know I would have lost touch with a long time ago. So I'm not opposed to the use of social media and its value, despite the fact I know what terrible things it's currently doing to a lot of people. But I think what we have to do is we just have to be really careful. When we sort of learn about how sites like Twitter and Facebook work, we have to understand that they are designed specifically to keep us looking at them. They are just dopamine machines. They are designed to make us feel good in our brains about staring at a screen for endless amounts of time. And once we sort of know that, now we can critically use these tools in the same way we would use a hammer. So for me, my social media is confined to times when I quite literally can do nothing else. So if I'm standing in line at the pharmacy waiting for a prescription, this is a perfect time for me to look at social media and see what's going on in the world. Or if I'm in the car waiting yesterday, for example, for my wife to run into Nordstrom to pick up some bathing suits for our kids, well, this is a perfect time for me to look at social media and figure out what's happening with my friends on Facebook and my news on Twitter. So it's not something we should be doing as entertainment. It is not something we should be using our free time for. It should be something that we are using in those moments when there's really nothing else we can do productively. I think that's how we should be utilizing things like social media. We just have to be careful, because you do not want to look back on your life and think, I spent thousands of hours staring at Facebook, because that is the last thing your 100-year-old self wants you to be doing.
Amen to that. I look at that and I'm like, wow, if we really kind of look at how much time we spend on social media, and heck, I think it's good for the tool that it is. But I do remember life before it, and things were much different.
It's also important to remember it wasn't that long ago that social media didn't exist, which means that if you're spending what most people are spending on social media, which is quite honestly, if you look at the numbers, hours per day, what that really means is they have replaced something else in their life for hours per day. And what I suspect they've replaced is really good stuff. They've probably replaced like actual interactions with human beings, or reading books, or exercising, things that really could like benefit them in enormous ways. And instead they're staring at these awful these somewhat awful platforms, which are often designed to make us feel bad about ourselves. It's hard to look at something like Instagram and not see everyone's beautiful life and not judge your own. I mean, that is tragically what happens to people all the time. So I do think you have to ask yourself, what was I doing before social media? Because it probably was better than what you're doing now.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, what are your thoughts around maximizing efficiency? I know that your book talks about that.
Well, I think that there's things we have to do in our lives that are unavoidable. We have to take a shower and mow the lawn and make our bed and empty the dishwasher, all of these sort of chores that are necessary in order to function in a life. And unless you're lucky enough to have sort of, someone taking care of your home and your landscaping and things like that, which most of us are not fortunate enough to do, I think the goal should be try to make those tasks as brief and as efficient as possible. And, my wife thinks I'm a little crazy, to be honest with you, but I have sort of experimented with the fastest way to empty my dishwasher, and I managed to shave off 2 minutes. And if I empty my dishwasher every day, which is about how often I empty it, those 2 minutes add up over time to significant amounts of time that I can use more productively. So, regardless of what chore I have to do, whether it's folding clothes or washing the dishes, even my commute, I often advise people that when you're thinking about where you're going to work next or where your first job is going to be, lots of factors should come into play. But the amount of time it will take you to drive to that job should be one of the primary factors because it essentially is going to determine the length of your workday. I live 5 minutes from the school where I've been teaching for 25 years. And that was strategic. That was purposeful because I wanted my school day to be as short as possible so I can get home in 5 minutes. I have friends who work an hour or two away from their jobs. And so they're never going to be as productive as I am because they spend an hour or two each way going to work every day. And sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes you just can't help but I work in the city and I live in the suburbs and that's the way the life is going to be. But oftentimes it is avoidable. I watch people take jobs for a little more money and suddenly they're on the road for an hour and a half a day. And if you just do the math, it's a disastrous math problem to do. It'll make you feel terrible. So you should just be looking at everything you have to do that you sort of don't want to do, but have to do, and find the quickest way to accomplish that goal.
So, in your book, you talk about scheduling return of compliments. So, what's that all about?
Well, I said before how I want to maximize positivity in our lives, and I think it's so important. As an elementary school teacher, I know that the science says that we need 6 positive remarks to negate one negative remark. So, unfortunately, our brains are wired to remember the negative, which makes sense if we're hunter gatherers. If we're out on the savannah and we have to remember which berry kills you and which berry doesn't. Remembering the negative is really important. That berry killed Uncle Joe and this one did not. But now we live in a world awash with Doritos and cheeseburgers. We don't have to worry so much about the negative anymore. The world is not as dangerous as it once was, but our brains are still wired that way. So we have to find ways to bring as much positivity into our lives. And so one of the ways I do it is I like to collect compliments so that I can reuse them in the future. I can look at them again and feel good about them. And so if someone emails me something kind, whether it's a reader of one of my books who enjoyed it, or a student who wants to say a nice thing to me, or just like my Aunt Diane on the Cape writing to me and telling me that it looks like my kids are doing really well and I must be doing a great job as a parent. What I do is I take those emails, I read them and enjoy them, I absorb the positivity, and then I snooze them. So snoozing an email is sort of like scheduling it for the future. And so with compliments, I do the same thing, except I just snooze them somewhere to the future randomly. I just randomly scroll the date and the month, and then I just hit snooze. And that means 6 months or a year, or maybe 10 years from now, a kind thing that someone once emailed me will return to my inbox again, and I will double the power of the positivity in that compliment. So I just believe in harnessing all of the positivity that we receive and using it as much as possible to keep our lives chugging along in a really happy and productive way.
What are some things that you want readers and our listeners to really take away from your book?
Well, I mean, there's a lot because it's 22 sort of actionable strategies. But one of the things I've been telling people recently And quite honestly, I'm not sure if it's really stated explicitly in the book. It's the idea that we spend an enormous amount of time in our lives thinking about other people. We think about our parents and our partners and our spouses and our children and our neighbors and our colleagues and our bosses. And all of that is wonderful. We need to invest in other people, and concern and empathy is important. But what happens is we often don't think enough about ourselves. I think most of us don't ever think about ourselves, meaning sit down on the couch and spend 30 minutes thinking about who you are and why you are and where you're headed and what you've accomplished and what you haven't. I think most people don't take the time to do that. I think they don't afford themselves the time to do that. And so often when people are feeling lost, like I don't have a dream or I don't have a goal or I'm not really feeling great about myself, I think what they're really saying is, I haven't given myself a chance to think about all of those things. And so I've been encouraging people as I've been talking about this book to just go allow yourself some time to think about you and nothing else. Take a look at where you are in your life. Ask yourself, do I have things I'm aiming for? Do I have dreams? Was there something from my childhood that I wanted to do that I never did, but it remains something that I wish I could do today? All of those things I think are forgotten in this life filled with other people. And so afford yourself the time. Tell your kids to go away. Tell your spouse to go away. Tell your parents not to call you. Tell your boss you're taking some time, and just sit and think about yourself and figure out what your next step is. Because I just think that is so missing from our lives today.
If for the people out there that want to make change, what is your advice to them?
Well, as we started sort of this conversation, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to take a step forward. You have to figure out what you can do, even though it's going to be terrible. Even though it is likely that the first step forward is going to be a misstep. There's nothing wrong with that. But we also have to make sure that we have hope. I think so often people look at someone like me who publishes books and thinks, well, he must, be standing on some mountain and he must have been given the gift of talent and, somehow he has managed to do this thing that I could never do. And what I like to remind people is like, just before we were talking, I was scouring a pan in my kitchen. And this morning I was cleaning up vomit from my cat. And I was trying to convince my son to get into a bathing suit quicker so that he could get to summer camp. Like my life is no different than anyone else's, except that in the moments when I have time to get things done, I figured out great ways to get them done. I use my time better than most people. And I want people to catch up with that because it's nothing special about me. It's just a series of strategies that I've developed over time, frankly, because when I was 21, I was robbed at gunpoint and that sort of changed my life forever. But it gave me the hope. You have to have the hope that people who accomplish things are not special in any way whatsoever. They're just sort of motivated and they've figured out a way to do it, and you can too. So you have to have hope that tomorrow is going to be better than today, that the next minute can be better than the minute we're in right now, and that any positive step forward, even if it ends up being a messy misstep, is better than nothing at all.
Well, Matthew, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Well, if you go to MatthewDix.com, you can kind of find everything there. But you can find me on social media, Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Matthew Dix, my name, and you can find me on Facebook the same way. So, I sort of put all of my things out in all of those places. But if you go to MatthewDix.com, you'll find my books and our podcast and all the things that we're doing. And I'd be happy to, I'd be happy to help folks sort of take that first step. I didn't write the book in hopes of sort of writing the book and then walking away to the next book. I wrote the book truly in hopes that people might start finding ways to live more productive and happy lives. And if I can be a part of that, I always am happy to do so.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you for having me. It truly was a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Matthew. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Someday is Today. Someday is Today is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers, and you can pick it up at the publisher, newworldlibrary.com. We're going to pause here for a quick moment, and we'll be right back after this message. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.